We kept passing the same fallen tree, no matter which direction we walked. At first it felt like a trick of fatigue, the sort of mistake your brain makes when the fog gets thick enough to erase distance. The trunk lay across the forest floor like a collapsed spine, bark split open to expose pale, fibrous wood. Lichen stippled its surface in muted greens and grays, and fat shelves of fungus clung to the underside as if the tree were sweating. I remember thinking it was too noticeable, too deliberately placed, to be coincidence. We stepped over it once, then again. On the second pass, Eli laughed, short and breathless, the sound wrong in the muffled air. "Didn't we already?" "No," Rowan said too quickly. "Different tree. They all look like this." But the forest had gone quiet in a way that made my ears ring. No birds, no insects, just the soft hiss of fog sliding between trunks and the faint, distant drip of water, steady as a pulse. By the third time we reached the tree, no one laughed. The fog had thickened into a milky shroud, blurring the bases of the ancient pines and hemlocks so they seemed to float. The ground underfoot was soft and slick, layers of wet leaves and black soil that smelled of rot and cold iron. Every step made a muted sucking sound, as if the forest were reluctant to let go. Rowan stopped dead in front of the trunk. "This is the same one," she said. Her voice sounded flattened, like it had been pressed into the ground. "Look, the split, the fungi." Eli crouched and touched the exposed heartwood. Sap clung to his fingers, sticky and chilled. He frowned, wiped his hand on his pants, and left a dark smear behind. "We turned south," he said. "I'm sure of it." "We turned east," I said, though even as I spoke, the certainty slipped. The path behind us already looked unfamiliar, trees subtly rearranged, angles wrong. Memory didn't hold its shape here. We picked a new direction, any direction, and walked. The forest seemed to tighten around us. Branches snagged our jackets with small, intentional tugs. Roots bulged up through the soil, slick and knotted, catching our boots before sinking back when we stared too long. The fog breathed, advancing and retreating, revealing the same shapes over and over until my eyes burned. And then the tree was there again, unmoved, unchanged, waiting. Something settled in my gut, heavy and cold. The fallen tree wasn't a marker. It was a boundary. When Eli kicked the trunk in frustration, the sound that came back wasn't solid wood striking wood. It was hollow, a long, woody sigh that traveled down through the ground. I felt it vibrate in my feet, lingering longer than it should have. After that, the forest began to behave differently. Paths we had just walked narrowed behind us, briars weaving themselves together with faint, wet clicks. Trunks leaned closer, crowding our shoulders. The fog thickened into walls that forced us forward. When Rowan brushed her hand against a birch, she yelped. The bark was warm, faintly elastic, as if something beneath it shifted at her touch. We started to feel it then. The sense of being watched wasn't a sound or a sight, but a pressure, like hands resting lightly on the back of the neck. Occasionally a creak rippled through the woods, too synchronized to be wind. Once, a shadow slid across the fog, long, antlered, almost shaped, then dissolved when I tried to focus on it. The fallen tree appeared again. By the fifth pass, dread had weight. The split in the trunk seemed wider now, the pale interior darker, veined with something that glistened wetly. The fungi had spread, caps opening like small mouths. When I leaned close, I heard whispering. Not words, but a soft, rhythmic susurration, like leaves being counted one by one. "We're not lost," Rowan said. Her hands were shaking, fingers curled tight into her sleeves. "We're being kept." Eli pulled out his compass. The needle spun uselessly, twitching and circling like it was trying to escape the glass. He swore and flung it into the fog. We listened to it clatter against something unseen, then stop too abruptly. Silence rushed back in, thicker than before. When the forest finally moved with intent, it was unmistakable. The ground sloped where it hadn't moments earlier, guiding us toward the tree. Roots rose from the soil like fingers, subtle but firm, steering our steps. Behind us, A hemlock bent low, its branches lowering to block the way back, needles whispering together as they brushed. Ahead, the fog thinned, framing the fallen trunk as if it were a stage. The tree split wider with a sound like fabric tearing. Inside was not rot but depth. The pale heartwood receded into a tunnel of concentric rings that pulsed slowly, like a breathing throat. A smell rolled out, sweet and metallic, like crushed berries and old blood. Something shifted within, and the whispering gained cadence. Names. Mine came last. Understanding hit all at once, sharp and total. This forest was ancient beyond measure, and it did not hunt with teeth or claws. It folded space. It remembered. It bent paths until direction dissolved, until you wore your own trail thin by walking it again and again. The fallen tree was where it gathered what it wanted, not flesh, not right away, but motion. The need to leave, the insistence on forward. Eli ran. The roots caught him gently, almost tenderly, looping around his ankles as if to keep him from stumbling. The ground rose to meet his face. When he screamed, the sound slid into the wood and never came back. Rowan backed away, eyes wide and shining. "Don't listen," she whispered to me. "It learns you when you listen." The forest leaned in. Fog pressed at her back. A branch brushed her hair in something like a caress, then hooked tight. She was pulled sideways into the gray, her cry cut off mid-breath. The fog closed, smooth and final. I stood alone before the tree, breath loud in my ears. The watching presence pressed close, warm now, vast and patient beneath the soil. The split trunk yawned wider, not hungry, but certain. I thought of straight roads, of places that stayed where you left them. I thought of turning around. I stepped over the tree. The world folded inward. Bark closed around me with a soft, living sound. Rings slid past as years peeled away. The whispering softened, almost kind, and the pressure eased. Somewhere above, fog rolled through ancient trunks. Paths shifted, and the fallen tree lay quiet and whole again, moss bright and pale, waiting for the next set of footsteps to arrive and walk in circles until they learned how to stop. Our compass spun wildly the deeper we went. At first it was just a nervous twitch, the needle shivering as if it couldn't settle. Cal said it was interference, iron in the soil, maybe, or a defect in the casing. He tapped the glass with his knuckle, smiled too quickly, and pointed us forward anyway. The forest closed behind us with a soft, leafy hush that felt intentional, like a door being pulled shut with care. Fog clung low between the trunks, pale and fibrous, obscuring the ground beyond a few yards. The trees were ancient, thick-barked, towering things whose roots surfaced like ribs before sinking back into the earth. Everything smelled damp and metallic, wet leaves and old decay layered with something faintly sweet, almost bruised. Sound behaved oddly here. Our footsteps landed too softly, swallowed before they could echo, while distant drips and cracks seemed closer than they should have been. We followed a narrow path that felt less worn than remembered. I was certain we'd passed a distinctive cedar with a lightning scar split down its side. But when I mentioned it, Mara frowned. "That was earlier," she said. "Near the creek." "There was no creek," Kel replied without looking back. The compass spun faster. Its needle whirled in tight, frantic circles, occasionally snapping toward a direction for half a second before skittering away again. Cal stopped and held it flat on his palm, jaw clenched. The fog around us thickened, then thinned, as if exhaling. When the needle finally stilled, it pointed straight down. "That's not possible," Cal muttered. We walked anyway. The forest began to rearrange itself in small, deniable ways. A cluster of birches we'd passed minutes earlier appeared again ahead of us, their white bark streaked with the same dark scars. Fallen logs shifted position between glances. Paths forked where none had existed, while others pinched shut behind us, briars knitting together with soft, damp clicks. I started to feel a pressure between my shoulder blades, a subtle insistence guiding my steps. Mara noticed it too. She kept turning, scanning the fog, her breath quickening. "Do you hear that?" I listened. At first there was nothing, then a sound like breathing, slow and enormous, moving through the trees rather than the air. The fog pulsed in time with it, rolling closer, then retreating. When I focused too hard, the rhythm slipped away, leaving only the pounding of my own heart. The compass jerked violently in Cal's hand, the needle rattling against the glass like it wanted out. He stared at it, eyes bright, transfixed. "It's pulling," he said. "It knows where to go. We just have to follow it long enough." "That thing doesn't know anything," Mara snapped. "It's broken. Or it's telling the truth," Cal said softly. We argued in whispers that felt loud, invasive. Memory started to blur at the edges. I couldn't say how long we'd been walking, or how many times we'd stopped at the same moss-choked clearing with the leaning oak at its center. Each time it felt like the first until the recognition set in, cold and nauseating. The oak shifted when we weren't looking. Its branches leaned closer, leaves whispering against one another in a sound that almost formed words. The ground beneath it was bare, the soil pressed smooth as if by countless passing feet. The compass needle snapped north and held. Cal smiled, wide and unblinking, and stepped into the clearing. The forest reacted immediately. Trees groaned, trunks subtly rotating, roots tightening beneath the soil. The fog surged inward, swallowing the path behind us. Sound warped. Our voices stretched thin, echoing back wrong, as if spoken by someone else from far away. Mara grabbed my arm. Her hand was ice cold. "This place remembers," she whispered. "I think it keeps what listens." Cal walked ahead, faster now, almost eager. The compass dragged him, needle trembling with effort, resisting whenever he slowed. With each step, the forest grew quieter, denser, older. The air felt thick, heavy with years. I caught glimpses between the trees, shapes that didn't move like animals, tall and jointed, their outlines blurring into bark and shadow when I tried to focus. We reached a hollow where the trees bent inward, forming a crude circle. At its center stood a stump so wide it might once have been a giant, its rings exposed and spiraling inward like a fingerprint. The compass went still in Cal's hand. He knelt, reverent, and pressed his palm to the wood. The stump breathed. I felt it then, not as fear but as understanding. The forest was not a place. It was a mechanism, a vast, living labyrinth that fed on direction, on the human need to orient, to arrive. Compasses, memories, landmarks, they were offerings. The more you relied on them, the deeper you were drawn. Cal laughed softly, eyes unfocused. "I see it," he said. "It's all one path." Roots rose and wrapped around his legs, gentle as fingers. The stump's rings shifted, opening inward. When Mara screamed his name, the sound bent and folded, disappearing into the wood. Cal didn't resist as he was pulled down, merging with the grain, his shape stretching into the pattern of the rings until there was no edge left to him. Mara ran. The forest surged after her, fog thickening, trees pivoting to close gaps. She vanished between the trunks, her footsteps dissolving into the breathing dark. I stood alone with the stump, the compass lying abandoned at its base. The needle spun once more, then slowly, deliberately, pointed at my chest. The fog rolled in, warm and close. I felt the forest's attention settle on me, patient and vast. Paths shifted. Time loosened its grip. Somewhere deep beneath the roots, something waited for me to decide which way I wanted to go, knowing now that every direction led further in.